It was the perfect afternoon for a celebration. The summer sun streamed through the windows of my home, illuminating the living room where guests were beginning to gather. At 72, I had just sold my restaurant chain Eleanor's Kitchen for $18 million. 40 years of work, sacrifices, and early mornings. 40 years creating recipes that were now served in 5 countries. All that effort had finally paid off. My son David insisted on organizing this celebration party. "Mom, this is a historic moment," he told me, with that persuasive tone I knew so well. "Let Rachel and me handle everything. You just relax and enjoy." Rachel, my daughter-in-law, had deployed all her talent for decoration. Fresh flowers in every corner, a canapé table that looked straight out of a design magazine, and waiters hired for the occasion. Everything was perfect. Perhaps too perfect. "Eleanor, you look radiant," Rachel said when she saw me coming down the stairs in my navy blue dress. The same Rachel who just a month ago had casually asked if I had updated my will. The same one who looked at my bank account with more interest than at me during our family meals. "Thank you, dear. You've done a wonderful job with the decorations." Rachel smiled, but her eyes remained cold. "Nothing is too good for you. After all, you're the woman of the moment." The guests arrived gradually. My former business partners, some lifelong friends, neighbors, and of course family. Among them was Barbara, Rachel's mother, a generally discreet woman who today seemed particularly nervous. "Eleanor, what a well-deserved success," Barbara said as she hugged me. "I always knew you were an extraordinary woman." I smiled sincerely. Barbara had always treated me with respect. Unlike her daughter, the party was proceeding normally. I was chatting with my former executive chef about the early days of the business when I saw it. It was just for a moment, but enough. Rachel was standing by the drinks table, looking around nervously before taking a small vial from her purse. With a quick movement, she poured the contents into a specific glass, the one with a small mark on the rim. My glass. The one I always used at celebrations. I felt the blood freeze in my veins. I could have screamed, could have immediately called the police. But 50 years in the business world had taught me that sometimes the best way to defeat an enemy is to let them believe they have the advantage. I continued my conversation as if nothing had happened, while watching Rachel take my glass and begin walking toward me with a smile that now seemed macabre. "Eleanor, you must be exhausted from all the greeting. Here, I brought you champagne," she said, offering me the poisoned glass with false sweetness. "How considerate, thank you," I replied, taking the poisoned glass. The next few minutes were a test for my nerves. I pretended to take small sips while maintaining trivial conversations. I waited for my moment, and when Rachel was distracted showing off her new tennis bracelet to some friends, I discreetly exchanged my glass with Barbara's, who was momentarily alone by the appetizer table. Why Barbara's glass? Perhaps because it was within reach. Perhaps because instinct told me it was the right option. Or maybe because, deep down, I knew this would make Rachel face something she had never considered, the consequences of her own actions. Barbara took the glass without paying attention, too busy admiring the decoration. Barely 5 minutes later, she was already commenting on the peculiar taste of the champagne. "Eleanor, where did you get this champagne? It has a strange aftertaste, somewhat bitter." Before I could answer her, Barbara put a hand to her chest. Her eyes opened in panic as she tried to stay on her feet, and then she collapsed. Chaos erupted in my living room. Guests shouted for an ambulance while Rachel feigned desperation next to her mother's body. I say feigned, because I had seen enough real crises in my life to distinguish genuine panic from acted. And Rachel's had something mechanical about it, as if she were playing the role of the distressed daughter in a bad movie. "Mom, Mom, what's wrong?" she shouted, while shaking Barbara, whose breathing had become erratic. David appeared by my side, his face pale. "What happened?" he asked in a tone I couldn't quite interpret. "I don't know," I replied, observing his reaction. "She was fine a moment ago." I saw an exchange of glances between my son and his wife. It was just a second, but enough to confirm my suspicions. David knew about the poison. The ambulance arrived within minutes. The paramedics worked efficiently, stabilizing Barbara before loading her onto a stretcher. One of them informed me they were taking her to Memorial Hospital. "I'm coming with you," I said, grabbing my purse. "That's not necessary, Mom," David quickly intervened. "We'll take care of it. You stay here and look after the guests." Keeping the potential witness away from the hospital. A predictable move. "Absolutely not," I replied firmly. "Barbara is practically family. I'm going with her." As I followed the ambulance in my car, my mind was racing. How far were they willing to go for my money? And what should I do now? At the hospital, I stayed close enough to hear the doctors. "Acute poisoning," I heard one say. "Probably some type of plant alkaloid. We need urgent toxicology tests." Rachel paced back and forth in the waiting room, her designer heels marking a nervous rhythm on the linoleum floor. David sat rigidly in a plastic chair, his phone constantly vibrating with messages he seemed reluctant to answer. "This is horrible," repeated Rachel. "Poor Mom. I don't understand how this could happen." I put a hand on her shoulder with feigned compassion. "These things are often a mystery, dear. By the way, how fortunate that she barely drank from that champagne before collapsing." Rachel's step faltered almost imperceptibly. "Champagne? Do you think it was the champagne?" "Oh, probably not," I replied with a dismissive gesture. "Just an old woman's mind looking for connections where there aren't any." But the damage was done. Rachel's face had lost color, and her hands trembled slightly as she poured herself coffee from the machine. 3 hours later, the doctor informed us that Barbara was stable, though she would need to stay overnight for observation. "The tests aren't conclusive," he said, "but whatever she ingested, her body is gradually eliminating it." When we left the hospital, David insisted I stay at their house that night. "After what happened, I'd feel better if you weren't alone, Mom." How considerate. Especially considering that Barbara's medical emergency surely had them wondering if I suspected something. And the answer was yes. Of course I did. "That's very kind of you, son. But I'll be fine at home. Remember I installed that new security system last month." I gave him a kiss on the cheek and got into my car, watching in the rearview mirror as he and Rachel had a tense conversation in the parking lot. Back home, I poured myself a glass of wine, from a new bottle of course, and sat in my study. It was time to find out exactly what my dear family was planning for me and, more importantly, what I was going to do about it. The poisoning wasn't random or accidental. Someone had planned to kill me at my own party, probably hoping it would look like a heart attack or stroke. At 72, these things happen. Nobody would question an older woman's heart failing after the excitement of selling her life's work. But why? That was the $18 million question. I prepared coffee and sat at my kitchen table with a notepad, writing down everything I knew about David and Rachel's financial situation. The picture wasn't pretty. David's architecture firm had been struggling since the recession, and Rachel's interior design business was nothing more than an expensive hobby without real profits. They lived well beyond their means. The mortgage on their house in the most exclusive neighborhood in town was triple what they could actually afford. The luxury cars in their garage weren't even paid off, and Rachel's spending on clothes and jewelry could support a modest family for years. I had helped them, of course. What mother wouldn't? A few thousand here and there. The down payment on the house, when Rachel insisted they needed the right environment to raise my granddaughter Sophie. The tuition for the girls' private school. In the last 5 years, I had given them nearly $300,000 in gifts, as I called them. Never loans, because that would have been in poor taste. But now I wondered if they saw it differently. Not as maternal generosity, but as advances on an inheritance they couldn't wait to collect. The phone rang at 7:30 in the morning. It was Rachel calling to check on me. "Eleanor, I couldn't sleep all night thinking about you," she said, with a voice laden with concern. "After what happened to Mom, I'm worried that maybe the food or drinks had something wrong with them. You haven't felt unwell, have you?" How attentive. Checking if her poison had reached its destination. "Not at all, dear. I feel perfectly fine." "How is Barbara?" "The doctors say she could go home today. They think she might have eaten something that disagreed with her before the party. You know how she is, with her medications." Barbara Thompson could be many things, but careless with her medications wasn't one of them. She organized her pills like a military operation, with labeled bottles and reminders on her phone. "What a relief," I replied. "I was worried it might have been something from the party. That would have been terrible." "Oh, not at all," Rachel quickly answered. "The doctors were very clear. It wasn't food poisoning. It was just one of those things." Curious how quickly she wanted to cut off any investigation into what had happened in my house, almost as if she feared someone might analyze the champagne that was left. After hanging up, I looked at the bottle that Rachel had opened at the party, still half consumed on my counter. What would happen if I sent it to a laboratory for analysis? Not that I needed proof for myself. I knew what I had seen. But maybe the evidence would serve later. The doorbell rang at 9 o'clock sharp. David was at my door, with a box of pastries from my favorite bakery, looking every bit the concerned son. "Thought you might like some breakfast," he said, kissing me on the cheek. "You probably barely ate yesterday, after everything that happened." I let him in and made fresh coffee while he arranged the pastries on a plate. I watched him move around my kitchen, opening cabinets he had known since childhood, taking the sugar without asking where it was. I felt a strange sadness. That was still my little boy, the one who brought me wildflowers, and proudly hung his elementary school drawings on the fridge. At what point had that child become the man, who remained silent, while his wife tried to kill his mother? "How are you feeling, Mom?" he asked, sitting across from me. "You know me, it takes more than a little scare to rattle these old bones." He smiled, but his eyes didn't match the gesture. "You see, Mom, Rachel and I have been talking about your situation." "My situation?" "You're 72, living alone in this huge house. All that money from the sale." He made a vague gesture. "It seems like a lot for one person to handle." There was the introduction to what would come next. "I appreciate your concern, son, but so far I've managed quite well." David leaned forward with a serious expression. "Really think about yesterday with Barbara. What if it had been you? What if you fall, and no one finds you for hours?" His audacity was incredible. He was using their failed murder attempt as an argument for why I needed their protection. "David, Barbara fainted at a party, with 30 witnesses, and the paramedics arrived in minutes. That's hardly a warning about living alone." "That's not what I meant." He ran his hands through his hair. That gesture I remembered from his teenage years, when he was about to ask for something he knew I would refuse. "Look, Rachel and I have been researching. There are beautiful communities for active seniors, places where you'd have people around, activities, doctors available. Ah, the retirement home speech. How convenient that they had already been researching options for me. Tell me, do you already have something in mind? Actually, yes. He took out his phone and showed me a glossy web page. Sunset Gardens. It's only 15 minutes from our house, so we could visit you all the time. They have a golf course, spa, cultural activities. It's more like a resort than a retirement home. I looked at the photos of smiling seniors playing bridge and doing water aerobics. They all looked so peaceful and content, probably because they were well medicated. The only thing, continued David, is that there's usually a waiting list, but if someone wanted to move in immediately, they would have to pay the full entrance fee up front. It's steep, about $400,000, but it covers everything: housing, food, medical care for life. That would make a nice dent in my liquid savings. And once I was safely tucked away in Sunset Gardens, who would have legal power over the remaining $17.6 million? Who would decide about my care and my money? Sounds lovely, I said. But you know I'm quite happy here. This house holds so many memories of your father. Mom, Dad's been gone for 12 years. Don't you think it's time to start a new chapter? The tenderness in his voice made my heart ache. If I hadn't seen what I saw last night, perhaps I would have considered his proposal. My son, concerned about his aging mother, wanting to make sure she was protected and cared for. It would have been touching. Instead, it was terrifying. I'll think about it, I finally said. It's a big decision. David's relief was evident. Of course. Take all the time you need. Maybe we could go next week to see the place, just to look. Maybe. I stood up and began clearing the breakfast dishes. You know, I should call Barbara today, make sure she's feeling better. Actually, Mom, Rachel asked me to tell you that Barbara probably needs to rest for a few days. The doctor said visitors might be too stimulating while she recovers. How convenient. Keep me away from the victim until the evidence leaves her body, and she doesn't remember the details well. After David left, I sat in my study and reflected on the situation. They had waited until after I sold the business to make their move. Smart. If I had died 6 months ago, my millions would have gone to David anyway according to my will, but as a gift from a living person, the tax implications would be very different. Killing me now, especially if they first managed to fabricate evidence that my mind was beginning to fail, would give them grounds to contest any recent changes to my inheritance plans. The more I thought about it, the darker the picture became. How long had they been planning this? How far were they willing to go? And most disturbingly, did I really know my own son? The image of Barbara collapsing in my living room kept replaying in my mind. If I hadn't switched the glasses, it would have been me ending up in the hospital, or worse. The thought chilled my blood. 40 years, building a restaurant empire, facing ruthless competitors and economic crises, only to be poisoned by my own family, in my home. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was James, my lawyer for over 20 years, returning the call I had made earlier. Eleanor, it's good to hear from you. How was the celebration for the sale? Eventful, I replied. James, I need to see you urgently. Is everything all right? I looked out the window of my study, at the garden my husband had planted years ago. The roses were blooming beautifully, though no one tended to them, but apparently I was now an old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own life. I'm not sure, I answered, but I think I'm about to find out. James's office was in an elegant building in the financial district. Dark wood, leather armchairs, and an impressive view of the city. I had always felt safe there, surrounded by law books and the subtle scent of his expensive cologne. "Tell me everything," James said after his secretary brought us coffee and closed the door. I recounted every detail: the party, Barbara's collapse, David's visit that morning. James listened in silence, occasionally taking notes in his notebook. "Are you sure of what you saw?" he asked, when I finished. "As sure as I am sitting in this chair." James leaned back, gently tapping his lips with his pen. "The problem is proving intent. Rachel could say she was adding something harmless to the champagne. A supplement, a flavoring, something personal. Without analyzing what was left in the bottle, we don't have evidence of attempted homicide. Then let's do the analysis. If we find poison, it proves she tried to kill someone. But even then, we can't prove she specifically wanted to kill you. She could claim the target was her own mother for insurance money, or that it was directed at someone else. That possibility hadn't occurred to me. So even with proven poison, they could get away with an attempted murder charge. But Eleanor, there's something else we need to discuss," said James with a grave expression. "If they're capable of killing you for your money, they might also try other avenues. Contesting your legal capacity, for example. On what grounds? Your age, living alone, the stress of selling your business. If they can establish a pattern of deterioration in your judgment or mental faculties, they could petition for legal guardianship over you. Once they gain control over the person, they also take control of their assets." Suddenly, the idea of the retirement home made complete sense. Isolate me. Surround me with doctors willing to document supposed signs of confusion or dementia. Even more so, if those professionals were well paid for their observations. "What do I need to do?" I asked. James opened a drawer and pulled out a thick folder. "First, we're going to document your current mental state. I'm going to arrange for you to be evaluated by an independent geriatric psychiatrist, someone specialized in assessing the capacity of older clients. That needs to be recorded immediately, and then we'll see how to get creative with your estate planning." His smile was sharp. "If David and Rachel want to play with your money, let them do it, but by your rules." We spent the next 2 hours reviewing options, trusts that would complicate any attempt to contest my decisions, medical directives that clearly specified who could and could not decide for me, financial arrangements that would trigger automatic audits if someone tried to access my accounts without authorization. "There's one more thing," said James, as I prepared to leave. "Based on what you told me about last night, you should think about your personal safety. Yes, they already tried once. They'll do it again, more carefully." I remembered David's suggestion that I stay at his house that night. How convenient. I would have been an elderly woman heartbroken by a friend's sudden illness, perhaps taking a sleeping pill to rest. So easy for an older woman to make a mistake and take too many pills. "What do you recommend?" I asked. "Security cameras, motion sensors, a panic button system. I know a company that protects high net worth individuals." High net worth individuals. That's what I was now. Apparently rich enough to be worth killing. On my way home, I eyed each car in my rearview mirror, suspiciously, wondering if I was being followed. Probably paranoia, but as my husband used to say, it's not paranoia if they're really out to get you. As I pulled into my garage, the phone rang. It was Rachel, with a forced voice, laden with false cheerfulness. "Eleanor, I wanted to let you know that Mom's out of the hospital. She's feeling much better, though she doesn't remember much about last night. The doctor said, that's normal in these cases." How convenient. I'm so glad she's better. I'd love to visit her tomorrow. She's not ready for visitors yet today. Maybe in a few days. I'll let you know. "Of course, dear. Just tell her I'm thinking of her." After hanging up, I sat in my car for a while, looking at the house that had been my home for 3 decades. My husband and I bought it when David was 10, with the hope of having our family dinners and holiday parties there. At that time the mortgage was heavy, but we were young and full of hope, convinced that everything would work out. Now it felt like a fortress, under attack, but years of business experience had taught me that sometimes the best defense is a good offense. It was time to show my family what a 72-year-old woman was capable of. The next morning, the security company arrived. 3 technicians in unmarked vans spent the day installing cameras, motion sensors, and a panic button that could call the police in less than 3 minutes. I told the neighbors I was having problems with package thefts, a believable excuse in any residential neighborhood. By the afternoon, my house was more secure than most jewelry stores, but the real security came at 2 o'clock, with Washington Namlin James's messenger delivered my updated will, the trust documents, and the medical directives, all properly signed and notarized. If David and Rachel wanted my money, they would have to wait, and they would receive much less than they imagined. The new will reduced David's inheritance from everything to a modest trust that would give him $50,000 a year for life, enough to live well, but not to maintain the lifestyle they were accustomed to. Most of my assets would go to cancer research, and smaller amounts to various charities I had supported over the years. As for Rachel, she would receive nothing, not a penny. I never liked her, but I tolerated her for David's sake. However, an attempted murder was my limit. As I sat in my study, I couldn't help but wonder what my late husband would say about all this. Thomas had always been an optimist, seeing the best in people, even when I suspected their intentions. Perhaps that's why we had worked so well as a team in business. He dreamed and I worried about the details, about potential betrayals. Never fully trust anyone when there's money involved, he used to tell me. Not even family. At the time I thought he was too cynical. Now I realized he might not have been cynical enough. The memory of Thomas gave me strength for what was to come. He would have been furious to see our son plotting against me, but he would also have been pragmatic. Do what you need to do to protect yourself, he would have said, and then move on. And that's exactly what I planned to do. I was reviewing the documents one last time when the doorbell rang. On the security monitor, I saw David and Rachel at the door, with serious expressions. "Mom, we need to talk," said David, when I opened the door. "Of course, son. Come in." They settled in the living room. Rachel sat on the edge of the sofa, as if ready to bolt. David looked around, noticing the new camera in the corner. "New camera?" he asked. "Package thefts," I replied calmly. "You know how it is these days. You have to be careful." Rachel cleared her throat. "Eleanor, we've been thinking about what happened the other night, with Mom's accident. Yes, we feel terrible about having the party here. If something we brought caused her to get sick." She let the sentence hang in the air, as she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue. I observed that performance with a certain professional admiration. Rachel had clearly rehearsed. "I'm sure it wasn't anything you brought, dear." "But it could have been," insisted David, leaning forward. "And if something was wrong with the champagne or the food, I would never forgive myself if we had inadvertently put you in danger." There was the setup for what they planned next. "The thing is," said Rachel, "we think it would be better if we took care of you for a while, just until we're sure you're all right." "Take care of me? How?" "Well, you could stay with us," David intervened. "Just temporarily, until we clear up what happened the other night." I let the silence stretch, observing their faces. David seemed genuinely concerned. He had always been skilled at believing his intentions were pure. Rachel, on the other hand, had the expression of someone with an overdue mortgage. "What a kind offer," I replied at last. "But I'm perfectly safe here." "Are you really?" retorted Rachel, with a harder tone. "Well, said Rachel finally, her voice tense. "I'm sure whatever you decided was for the best." "I think so too, dear." They left shortly after, promising to return soon to check on me. I watched them from my security monitor, sitting in their car in front of my driveway for 10 minutes, arguing intensely. Then Rachel made a phone call. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I could see her gesturing angrily. David kept trying to take the phone from her, but she pushed his hand away again and again. When they finally drove away, I poured myself a glass of wine and settled into my favorite armchair. Tomorrow I would set the second phase of my plan in motion, but tonight I was going to savor the first peaceful evening I'd had in days. In the end, there's something deeply satisfying about watching your enemies realize they've underestimated you. The game had only just begun, and I had been playing it much longer than they had. The next morning brought a visitor I wasn't expecting. Barbara Thompson appeared at my door, pale but steady, clutching a small purse as if it were her lifeline. "Eleanor, I need to talk to you," she said without preamble. "It's about the other night." I invited her in and made her tea, observing her face for signs of the poisoning. She looked tired but lucid, certainly much clearer than her daughter wanted me to believe. "Rachel told me I had a reaction to a medication," Barbara commented as she sat in my living room. "But Eleanor, I haven't taken anything but vitamins for years." "Interesting. What do you remember about the party?" "Everything until I started feeling dizzy. I remember the champagne tasted strange, bitter, almost metallic. And I also remember seeing Rachel near the drinks table doing something with a small vial. I felt my pulse quicken." "What kind of vial?" "One like a dropper, the kind used for essential oils or other things." Barbara's hands trembled slightly as she set her cup on the table. "Eleanor, I think my daughter tried to poison you." "Why would you think that?" Barbara's laugh was bitter. "Because she's been talking about your money for months, about how unfair it is that you have so much while they struggle, about how much easier their life would be if something happened to you." The pieces were starting to fit together. "Did she say anything more specific?" "Last month she asked me if I thought you had updated your will. She seemed very concerned about David's inheritance." Barbara held my gaze. "Eleanor, I think they've been planning this for a long time. I made a decision." Barbara deserved to know what her daughter had attempted, and I needed an ally who had witnessed her behavior firsthand. "Barbara, I saw Rachel put something in my champagne glass. I switched our drinks on purpose." The color drained from her face. "She tried to kill you, and I almost died in your place." We sat in silence for a few seconds, absorbing the magnitude of what had happened. "What are you going to do?" Barbara finally asked. "I'm going to give them exactly what they want," I replied, "just not in the way they expect to receive it." Barbara raised an eyebrow. "What does that mean?" "It means your daughter and my son are about to discover that some games have much higher stakes than they imagined." After Barbara left, I called an old business contact. Linda Torres ran a private investigation agency specializing in corporate espionage and background checks. We had worked together several times over the years when I needed information on potential partners. "Eleanor Wilson." Linda's voice sounded warm on the phone. "I heard about your sale. Congratulations." "Thank you, Linda. I need a favor. A personal one." "What kind of favor?" "I need to know everything about my son's finances, bank accounts, credit cards, loans, investments, everything." There was a pause. "Eleanor, are you sure? Sometimes information about family can be uncomfortable." "I'm sure. Give me 48 hours. While Linda worked her magic, I set the next part of my plan in motion. I called David and asked him to meet me for lunch at our usual restaurant, the same place where we celebrated his architecture graduation. his wedding, the birth of Sophie. He arrived nervous, constantly checking his phone. "How are you feeling, Mom? You sounded upset when you called." "I've been thinking about what you and Rachel said about my safety, about planning for the future." His face lit up. "And I think you're right. I think it's time to make some changes." David leaned forward eagerly. "What kind of changes?" "Well, I've been looking into Sunset Gardens, that place you mentioned. I called them this morning." "That's great news, Mom. I think you're going to love it there. If they have a vacancy, but we need to move quickly. There's another person interested in the same unit." "How quickly?" "Next week. I'd have to pay the entrance fee before Friday to secure it." David's excitement was evident. "That's not a problem, is it? You have the money from the sale?" "Of course. It's just that, well, it's a big step. I thought maybe you and Rachel could help me with the paperwork, make sure I'm making the right decision." "Of course, we'd be happy to help you." I smiled at my son, memorizing his face. In a few days that eager expression would transform into something very different. "There's just one detail," I added casually. "The residence requires all residents to have a registered power of attorney, someone who can make decisions if they become unable to do so. I was hoping you'd be willing to handle that." "Of course, Mom. Whatever you need." "Perfect." David thought he was manipulating me into giving him control over my money. Instead, he was walking straight into my trap. Linda called on Thursday morning with her report. I listened with growing amazement as she detailed David and Rachel's financial situation. It was worse than I had imagined. "Their debt level is at the limit," said Linda. "The house has been refinanced 3 times. They have 2 mortgages plus a home equity line of credit that's already maxed out. Credit card debts exceeding $90,000. How have they been paying?" "Barely. David's business has been operating at a loss for 2 years. They've been using credit cards to pay other credit cards. Classic signs of financial desperation." "Anything else?" "Rachel took out a life insurance policy on you 6 months ago. $500,000 with her as the beneficiary." My blood ran cold. "How is that legal?" "She claimed insurable interest as your daughter-in-law and caregiver. The insurance company probably assumed David was the real beneficiary, and Rachel was just handling the paperwork. A life insurance policy. They had been planning my death for months, not days." "Is there anything else?" "Eleanor, David has been making regular payments to someone called Dr. Nathan Brooks, a geriatric psychiatrist." "For what?" "I'm not sure yet. But the payments started 3 months ago. Small amounts, like consultation fees." "Dr. Nathan Brooks. I made a note to ask James about him." That afternoon, David and Rachel arrived at my house with a briefcase full of retirement home documents. They spread the papers on the dining room table like generals planning a battle. "This is the admission contract," explained Rachel, pointing to a thick stack of papers. "And this is the financial disclosure form. It lists all your assets so they can calculate your monthly fees." "It's very thorough," I observed, reviewing the documents. "They wanted access to all my accounts, all my investments. All the power of attorney paperwork is here," added David, sliding another document toward me. "It's pretty standard. It just gives me the authority to handle your financial affairs if you can't." I read the power of attorney document carefully. It was much broader than David had indicated. With this signature he would have immediate access to my bank accounts, investment portfolios, and the authority to make any financial decision on my behalf. "This seems quite extensive," I told him. "Do I really need to give you this much authority?" "Mom, it's just a precautionary measure," said David. "The place requires it. And honestly, at your age, it's good to have someone younger handling the complexities of finance." At my age. There was that phrase again. And what if I change my mind about Sunset Gardens? Can this be revoked? David and Rachel exchanged a quick glance. Well, technically yes, said Rachel. But the place has strict policies for residents who try to leave. There are medical evaluations, waiting periods. Of course it was. Once I signed these papers and moved to Sunset Gardens, they would control my money, and it could be very difficult for me to leave, especially if Dr. Nathan Brooks was willing to evaluate my mental competence. I need to think about this overnight, I said, gathering the papers. It's a big decision. David's face fell. Mom, remember we need to submit everything tomorrow if you want the unit. I understand. I'll give you an answer in the morning. After they left, I called James. James, what can you tell me about Dr. Nathan Brooks? Brooks is a geriatric psychiatrist who specializes in competency evaluations for elderly patients. Why? My son has been paying him for consultations. There was a long pause. Eleanor, Brooks has a reputation for being accommodating to families concerned about an elderly relative's judgment. His evaluations tend to support whatever outcome the family is seeking. You mean he's willing to declare people incompetent for money? I couldn't say that officially, but I've seen several cases where families use Brooks's evaluations to gain control over an elderly person's assets. The picture was becoming clear. David and Rachel weren't just after my money. They had developed a complete plan to take it from me. Take me to Sunset Gardens, under the guise of safety and care. Use the power of attorney to access my accounts. If I resisted or tried to leave, have Dr. Brooks declare me mentally incompetent. It was actually quite clever. If I hadn't seen Rachel poison the champagne, I might have fallen right into their trap. James, I need you to prepare something for me, I said. And I need it ready by tomorrow morning. What kind of something? The kind of something that will teach my family a lesson they'll never forget. That night, I sat in my study going over the plan once more. Everything had to be perfect tomorrow. David and Rachel would get exactly what they deserved. But first, I had one more call to make. Friday morning dawned gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that made everything seem gloomy, perfect for what I had planned. David and Rachel arrived punctually at 9, both dressed as if attending a business meeting, which in a way they were. Have you decided, Mom? Asked David, settling into the living room with barely contained excitement. I have. I took out the Sunset Gardens papers, already signed and notarized. I think you're right. It's time to start this new chapter. Rachel's expression of relief was evident. Oh, Eleanor. That's good. You're going to love that place. I'm sure I will. And David too. I signed the power of attorney papers. David's hands trembled as he took the documents. This is the right decision, Mom. You won't regret it. I smiled at him. We spent the next hour reviewing the financial papers. Rachel had a laptop open, typing rapidly as I gave her account numbers and access codes. Every few minutes they exchanged meaningful glances, like children who couldn't believe Christmas had come early. There's one more thing, I said when we finished. I need to sign some additional papers with my lawyer before the transfer is official. Something about tax implications of large financial transactions. Of course, said David. Do you want us to take you to his office? Actually, he's coming here. James should arrive any moment. Just then the doorbell rang, but it wasn't James Donovan standing at my door. It was Detective Sarah Johnson of the County Police Department, accompanied by a colleague I didn't recognize. Mrs. Wilson, I'm Detective Johnson. We need to speak with you about an incident that occurred at your house this week. David stood up quickly. What kind of incident? A suspected poisoning, said Detective Johnson, looking between David and Rachel. We understand there was a medical emergency here during a party. Rachel's face turned very pale. That was my mother. She had a reaction to her medication. The doctors said it wasn't serious. Actually, Mrs. Miller, that's not what the hospital reported. Detective Johnson took out a notebook. The toxicology results show that your mother ingested a concentrated amount of oleander extract. That's not a medication. It's a deadly poison. The silence in my living room was deafening. We also analyzed the champagne left from that night, continued the detective. The bottle opened for the party contained the same oleander extract. Someone had deliberately poisoned that champagne. David was looking at Rachel with an expression of growing horror. Rachel, what did you do? I didn't do anything. Rachel's voice was filled with panic. This is insane. Why would I poison my own mother? That's what we're trying to figure out, said Detective Johnson, especially since the champagne glass with the highest concentration of poison was originally intended for Mrs. Wilson. Rachel looked like she might faint. David slumped back into his chair, his face ashen. There's something else, I said quietly. Detective, show them the insurance policy. Detective Johnson nodded and pulled out another document. Mrs. Miller, we discovered that 6 months ago you took out a life insurance policy for $500,000 on Mrs. Wilson. That gives you a clear financial motive for murder. This is crazy, whispered Rachel. Eleanor, tell them this is crazy. I looked at my daughter-in-law, this woman who had pretended to care for me while planning my death. I saw Rachel put the poison in my champagne glass. I deliberately switched our drinks. David's head snapped up. You knew she was trying to poison you. I've known for days. I also know about your financial situation, about Dr. Brooks, about your plan to have me declared incompetent. I know everything. The power of attorney papers slipped from David's numb fingers. Mom, I swear to God I didn't know she was going to try to kill you. But you knew everything else, didn't you? The retirement home, the power of attorney, the plan to take my money. David's silence was answer enough. Detective Johnson stepped forward. Rachel Miller, you're under arrest for attempted murder. As they put the handcuffs on her, Rachel turned to me with eyes full of rage. You think you're so smart, don't you? No, I replied calmly. I know exactly what I've done. After the police took Rachel away, David remained sitting in my living room like a man in shock. He stared at the power of attorney papers scattered on the floor, occasionally running his hands through his hair. She said it was just about getting you somewhere safe, he finally said. She said you were becoming forgetful, making bad decisions. She convinced me you needed protection. And the money. Was that about protection too? David's face crumpled. We're so in debt, Mom. The business is failing. We're behind on everything. Rachel said if something happened to you naturally, we'd inherit enough to start over. But she never said anything about, he made a gesture of desperation, about murder. I thought we were just planning for the inevitable, arranging everything for when you died of natural causes. How convenient that those natural causes needed a little help to arrive. David looked at me with tears in his eyes. I'm sorry. Forgive me, Mom. I never meant to hurt you. I studied my son's face, looking for the truth beneath the remorse. Part of me wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that Rachel had manipulated him into this situation, but I had been in business too long to ignore the warning signs. David, show me your phone. What? Your phone. Show me your messages with Rachel from last week. David hesitated. Then he reluctantly handed me his phone. I scrolled through his messages, my heart sinking with each conversation I read. Did you talk to Mom about Sunset Gardens? Rachel. Yes, she's considering it. David. Good. The sooner we move her the better. Rachel. She's been asking too many questions about our finances, David. What if she changes her mind? Rachel. She won't. Not after tomorrow night. David. What's happening tomorrow night? Rachel, trust me. By Sunday she'll be begging us to take care of her. David. I handed the phone back to David. You knew, didn't you? Maybe not the specific method, but you knew Rachel was planning something for the night of the party. David's shoulders slumped. I thought she wanted to scare you somehow, stage a fake burglary, or some kind of accident that would make you realize you weren't safe living alone. You thought she was going to fake my attempted murder. Not murder, just something that would convince you to move to Sunset Gardens of your own free will. The casual way he said it chilled my blood. My own son was comfortable with the idea of traumatizing me into compliance. David, there's something else you need to know. I told him. I hired a private investigator to look into your finances. His face went white. What did you find? Everything. The debt. The failing business. The fact that you've been living beyond your means for years. I took out Linda's report. But there was something that particularly caught my attention. The payments to Dr. Brooks. Mom, I can explain. Can you? Because according to this, you've been paying him to consult on my case for 3 months, before you mentioned Sunset Gardens, before you showed any concern about my mental state. What exactly were you consulting him about, David? David buried his face in his hands. Rachel said, we needed a backup plan in case you refused to sign the power of attorney of your own free will. A backup plan. Brooks agreed to evaluate you and look for signs of dementia or incompetence. Rachel said it was just precautionary, in case you became difficult. I felt something cold settle in my chest. They had been planning to declare me incompetent from the beginning. Only if necessary. Only if you refused to let us help you. Help me with what, David? Help me give you my money. The truth hung in the air between us. My son, the little boy I had raised, loved and sacrificed for, had been planning to destroy my independence and steal the fruits of my labor. Is there anything else? I said quietly. The papers you signed today. The power of attorney you gave me. David looked up hopefully. They're fake. James prepared them specially for this meeting. They give you power over a bank account that contains exactly $1. David stared at me in shock. What? My real money is safely protected in trusts you can't access. The will you were so concerned about leaves you a modest annual income and nothing more. And if you're convicted of conspiracy in Rachel's plot, even that will disappear. David's face crumbled. You've destroyed my life. No, David. You destroyed your own life. I just made sure you couldn't destroy mine in the process. As I watched my son sitting there broken, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not satisfaction, not vindication, just a deep, exhausting sadness for the man he had chosen to become. 3 months later, I sat in my garden watching the roses bloom, thinking about endings and beginnings. Rachel had been sentenced to 12 years for attempted murder. David received 2 years for conspiracy, though his lawyer managed to reduce the sentence from the original charges. Sophie, my granddaughter, had called me the night before. At 15, she was old enough to understand what her parents had done, enough to be horrified by their decisions. Grandma Eleanor, I'm so sorry, she had said, her voice breaking with tears. I had no idea they were planning all this. I know, sweetheart. This isn't your fault. Can I come visit you this summer? I know Mom and Dad are away, but I'd like to see you. I'd love that. I told her. And I meant it. Sophie was innocent in all this. A victim of her parents' greed as much as I was. Barbara Thompson had become an unexpected friend. Now we met twice a week for coffee. 2 women bonded by the strange experience of surviving betrayal by our own family. She was considering writing a book about elder abuse, using our story as a cautionary tale. You know Eleanor, Barbara said, during our last coffee date. I keep thinking about how close they came to getting away with it. They never had a chance, I replied. I've been dealing with people who wanted my money for 40 years. The only difference this time is that they shared my DNA. Barbara laughed. Do you ever regret how it ended with both of them in prison? I considered the question seriously. I did regret it. David was my son, the child I had raised and loved. But he was also a man willing to destroy my life for money. I regret that it was necessary, I said finally. But I don't regret protecting myself. The doorbell interrupted my reverie in the garden. Through the security monitor, I could see James Donovan standing on my porch with a briefcase, looking unusually pleased with himself. James, what brings you here? Good news, he said, settling into my living room. The insurance company has decided not to contest Rachel's life insurance policy. Since she was convicted of trying to kill you, they'll void the policy and return all the premiums paid. Something, I suppose. Here's more. David's creditors are repossessing all his assets to pay his debts. That includes the house you helped them buy. They're asking if you want to make an offer. I thought about David and Rachel's house, with its granite countertops and cathedral ceilings. All those beautiful things they had so desired. No, I said. Let someone else have it. Someone who can pay for it honestly. James nodded and pulled out another document. The final point. The restructuring of your trust is complete. Your money is now protected for life. No one can access it without your express written consent, and if someone tries to have me declared incompetent, the trust automatically transfers to a charitable organization. Thank you, James, for everything. After James left, I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on my terrace watching the sunset paint the sky with golden and pink hues. At 72, I had already learned that money can bring out the best and worst in people. Unfortunately, in my own family it brought out the worst, but I also learned something else. I was stronger than I thought, clever enough to see through their plans, tough enough to stop, and resilient enough to build a new life. Without them, my phone vibrated with a message from Sophie. Grandma, I got accepted to College Law, like you suggested. Can't wait to tell you all about it when I visit. I smiled as I typed the reply. Congratulations, my love. I'm so proud of you. Perhaps that was the real victory, not avoiding David and Rachel's plan, but ensuring that the next generation had the chance to choose better. Sophie would grow up knowing that money is a tool, not an end. That family means support and love, not exploitation and greed. The roses in my garden bloomed beautifully, now tended by an excellent gardening service I could easily afford. The house felt peaceful, protected by security systems and legal documents that ensured my independence. I began this story talking about veiled poisoning at my celebration party, but it was really about something much more important. The difference between being old and being powerless. I may be 72, but I was far from powerless. And anyone who tried to test that theory would learn, as David and Rachel did, that underestimating an older, savvy woman is a very costly mistake. Sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and ensuring that the people who hurt you don't enjoy the fruits of their plans. I had accomplished that, and I would sleep soundly knowing it was so. After all, at my age, a good night's sleep is worth more than all the money in the world. The fact that I had both was just a bonus.